Welcome back, baseball fans. The 1973-76 Carryover League. Continuing in the offseason look of how to improve the teams from 73 to 76. We went through the 8 teams, first 8 a week ago. Got the math closer to the 40202 that each of the teams need in the code here, meaning that they need to keep 4 guys, waive 2, retire 2. All teams have to do that before the draft, which is in March of 2025. It's done by making trades and balancing trades with draft tokens. We've gone through 8 teams, the 8 worst teams, the 4th place teams in each division a year ago. Tonight we're going to look at what's happened with the next 8 teams. Beginning with the California Angels. The Angels had a nice trade they made with the Twins. The Angels sent Bill Singer and Kurt Blefary to the Twins for George Mitterwald and Bill Parsons. The Angels also get a draft token as Singer's a 20-game winner. So win-win for both sides. The Angels needed to create room for Gary Ross, a pitcher that they get in 76 who pitches on 3 days rest. So they were able to move on from Singer, who is getting closer to retirement. Mitterwald is an extra catcher for the Twins. They have Mitterwald and Phil Roof. So the trade really benefited both clubs, the Angels and the Twins. When we do this trade, the Twins are at 50102 instead of 50201. California moves to 40202. They get the proper math. Next up, the Padres. To get to 50201, they did a couple things. They decided that LaRon Lee, nobody wanted him in a deal, so they just put him on waivers. And then they also made a deal down here where they sent Ken McMullen to Milwaukee for a retired player. So this was simply about accounting for the Padres. They're simply going to go into the draft looking like something like this. Vince Colbert, Vincente Romo, Cito Gaston, and Bob Johnson. Arizona made a minor deal as well. They just moved Dale Maxwell from the keeper list to the waiver list. And by doing that, they go from 50102 to 40202. Arizona moved both their shortstops on waivers, and that's sort of the game these teams play to hide almost a player, hiding shortstops like Dale Maxwell and Fred Stanley, figuring that these guys bounce all over baseball. They'll be in the league, but who knows where they'll be. So Arizona might want to reacquire Dale Maxwell or Fred Stanley or something comparable. Milwaukee made some deals, folks, and a big one. Huge deal for the Brewers. Didn't have a lot of resources in the offseason, but one of the resources was Mike Torres, and Oakland was the team that decided to make the deal. So in this deal, remember, Oakland traded Vida Blue for Don Wilson and Al Downing, and that was a calculated move to get 2 pitchers to pitch exclusively in the dynasty years versus Vida Blue, who pitches all the way into the early 80s, to win now. Typically what Charlie Finley would have wanted to do, win now. And it worked. They won the World Series. But now they've in a conundrum where they can't keep both guys. So unable to keep both Wilson and Downing because they also want to keep Joe Rudy, Catfish Hunter, and Ken Holtzman. They send both guys to Milwaukee for a retired pitcher and for Mike Torres. And Mike Torres, 1976 Oakland A, outstanding pitcher. So this helps both teams. Oakland gets a draft token because they traded 2 for 1. And it helps both the Brewers and the Oakland A's. Milwaukee also acquired Darryl Thomas in a separate deal with Ohio to play second base for them. Milwaukee did not have a second baseman in this era because they had Pedro Garcia was drafted out of their system. They don't Jim Gantner is still a ways away, as is Paul Molitor, so they don't really have an heir apparent at second base yet. So they went out and got Daryl Thomas, who has a really nice year, 75 with San Diego, and then he's going to be with the Brewers for at least a short spell until Paul Molitor arrives. And it cost the Brewers another draft token. So they moved some tokens, did the Brewers, but they got a nice set of, yeah, they had to. They started with 20204, and now they're at 40202. And the three of the four guys they're keeping weren't even on the Brewers a year ago. Don Wilson, Al Downing, Daryl Thomas, and then Steve Hovley, who was with them a year ago. Next up, Houston. The Astros made a deal. This was not involving any of the keeper waivers and retires. It was about the finally moving on from Jim Wynn. So they relented by letting Jim Wynn go to the Dodgers, where he would have played in '74. They sent a backup catcher, Ken Suarez, to get Joe Ferguson, who is a real... He's got like 25 home runs. So that's a lot of pop out of a catcher, Joe Ferguson. And Bob Hansen. But because Jim Wynn is such a star, the Astros have to... the Astros get a token on that one for losing Jim Wynn. So Houston and the Dodgers very seldom get a trade between division rivals. We saw earlier that the Giants only allowed Mike Marshall to slip to the Dodgers if the Yankees were going to be in the middle and send some money to the Giants, which is what happened. But this time around, Houston and Dodgers make a deal. Next up, Toronto, a team who's had a really good front office. Should not be competitive in this timeline where they don't exist, but they have been. Right in the playoffs a year ago or on the edge of this past year. No takers for Rorik Harrison. He has to go on waivers. But they made a deal to get Bert Hooton off the Cubs. And this was a good move for both teams. The Cubs had too much talent. They had 7 guys they wanted to keep. The 4 keepers, traditional Cub players, Billy Williams, Ron Santo, Rick Russell, and what was the other one? I always forget the long list of Cubs here. Rick Russell, Billy Williams, Ron Santo, and Jose Cardinal. Those are the 4 the Cubs are going to keep, which means that Glenn Beckert's on the trade block, Jim Hickman's on the block, and they got a taker for Bert Hooton. And that's Toronto. And the reason why Toronto made that deal was that Doyle Alexander was a starter a year ago. He's going to be going into the bullpen. So Toronto will go with 4-man rotation, 2 lefties and 2 righties. Hooton, Carl Morton, Jerry Royce, and Clyde Wright. Toronto, very, very good squad. We look at the numbers. Toronto started the process with 4 guys on the retired list, which is a lot. Now they're down to 40103. So they have to just trade one of the retirees for a waiver player. They could even do that with the next team, the Colorado Rockies. The Rockies started at 50201. They had to decide between keeping Eddie Watt or Dave Duncan. They decided they liked the power of Dave Duncan. He gets home runs, something the Colorado covets. So they ship Eddie Watt back to Baltimore. Eddie Watt returns to Baltimore, and Colorado gets a draft token for that. And Baltimore has Milt Pappas going on waivers. Milt Pappas comes and goes again from the Orioles. This allows Baltimore to move Wayne Garland from the bullpen to the rotation, and Eddie Watt will take a bullpen spot with Dyer Miller and Grant Jackson and one other pitcher they have in their bullpen. Let's look at Baltimore again. They still have to replace a retiring Joe Horley. They got one more spot open in the pitching staff. Baltimore will keep Lee May, Earl Williams, Mike Cuellar, Eddie Watt. So when we look at the 16 teams now, it's pretty impressive that these trades have all been relatively simple math. It hasn't been a real headache. If you follow the league a year ago, we had the Joe Morgan deal, and we moved a lot of players in that one. We moved, I might even have it here somewhere. kept it all on one of these sheets. The Oakland deal, yeah, and Seattle, Cincinnati. This was the Joe Morgan deal a year ago, folks. Not a joke. It was a 5-team, 16-player trade. Yeah, 5 teams, 16 players to move Joe Morgan last year. That's how difficult that was. Oh boy! Every first baseman, like the Reds moved Lee May to the Orioles. The Orioles sent Boog Powell to Cleveland. Cleveland sent Chambliss to the Yankees. The Yankees, yeah, you get the idea. Anyway, lots sleeker this year. Everybody sort of like is happy with the moves they're making. They're happy with their rosters, and they're also noticing that they're not envious of what the other teams have. So it's a good spot to be in. Halfway through the initial off-season setup, if you look over here, you want the first number to be 40202, right? So literally the Cardinals just need to find a home for Sonny Sieber to put him on waivers. Seattle needs to decide between Dick Woodson or Jerry Bell, put the other guy on waivers. Minnesota has to realize no one's going to trade for Killebrew and put him on waivers. And if all that happens, that means that the first half of the league is pretty much ready to draft, with just some wavered and retired players being traded for each other. Which means the next time we'll get together and begin the next half, and the more competitive, the teams closer to the playoffs, there's a lot of guys on the keeper side of things here. You see Kansas City has 7, Pittsburgh 6, the Mets 6, Cubs and White Sox started with 7, Giants started with 6. So a lot of guys to be kept, and a lot of teams have already filled their houses and they don't have any room. So these teams are going to find out that there's some talent and no one's going to want their talent. They got to figure out where to put these guys. So we'll begin the next week by looking at the next 8 teams: Philadelphia, Kansas City, Pittsburgh. Speaking of some names of guys on the trade block right now, Kansas City's they don't have no room for Lou Piniella, Edgar Patrick, Roger Nelson. Pittsburgh's got Bob Moose, Ramon Hernandez in the trade block. Tigers have Joe Coleman out there. Mets have Bobby Darwin, Duffy Dyer. Cubs already traded Bert Hooton. They've got Glenn Beckert, Jim Hickman out there. White Sox have Carlos May and Tom Bradley on the trade block. They already traded Aparicio. Giants have to move on from Willie Mays. They already traded Mike Marshall. So yeah, there's a lot more exciting trades potentially happening in the 73-76 carryover league. Hope you're enjoying the look of the league, and we'll see you next time.